Ready to rock? All right. Hey everyone, my name's Scott Hoffman. Welcome to Munro Live. Today we have a Mercedes EQS in the building, and we're going to take some time to go through and look at different aspects of the infotainment system and the screen that hosts it. We'll get inside here in just a minute, kind of open things up, let you take a look around, power it up. One thing I would say as we begin to approach the vehicle that'll stick out to everyone right away is what Mercedes is calling the Hyperscreen. And so there has been kind of this arms race with screens when it comes to vehicles. We'll show it to you set off here, or with the vehicle off at this point, just to kind of give you a glimpse of both states of it. This one, it's a 56-inch, what they call screen, but it's actually comprised of three screens, which we'll get into in a moment here. But as you can see, it spans darn near the full dash here. Extending, there's just the HVAC vents are like about the only thing that's not part of the screen at the ends there. We'll get into that, but essentially you can see you've got a single piece of glass that goes across, three separate panels. The ones on the outboard sides are 12.3 inches. The one in the middle is 17.7 inches, and there's a single plane of glass that's covering that, and there is some slight curvature to it. So kind of an interesting strategy here. It's neat to see that, you know, Tesla kind of started this race to the bigger screens, right? They had with the early Model S, they had the sort of tablet style screen that sat proud. It was 17 inches. That was significantly larger than what we had seen in any other vehicles at the time. And it kind of started this pursuit of maybe more focus on the infotainment system for OEMs moving forward. So we've seen other vehicles, you know, the Mach-E had a 15+ inch screen. You know, the new Rams have a nice 12-inch vertical screen in there. Interesting to see as people continue to pursue that. It's actually refreshing to see someone take kind of a different approach, still do something fancy and different with the screen, but not just to necessarily copy what we've seen in other vehicles. So we'll hop in here, we'll power it up, we'll talk more about this. But yeah, kind of an interesting approach. Definitely one of the most striking features on the interior when you walk up is the Hyperscreen. And fun fact, that name, you know, people get a little tricky with cyber and giga and hyper. According to the internet, the engineers at Mercedes-Benz were heavily influenced by a German techno rave band called Scooter that has a song called Hyper Hyper, and apparently that song title worked its way into the name of the screen. So congrats, Scooter the band, you've influenced a Mercedes-Benz. So anyways, let's get in and take a look at it. Probably ought to unlock it here. So we've got the door handles that pop out, assuming I can make sure it's unlocked. Whoop, there we go. See, they pop out. Got some lighting features here. I think, yeah, you can see we've got approach lighting on the ground. That is something that as we get inside, you're going to see. The lighting in here is a little weird. You got the puddle light with the Mercedes-Benz logo. You got the illumination around the handle. As we open this up, and maybe they're not on yet, you can see a little bit of the lighting here. But once we get inside, we're going to show. I made an attempt to count them up. They're kind of subdued at the moment, but there are no fewer than 34 separate light pipes or LEDs in this system, and it's all configurable. So that is one of the things as you get in. It's clear they put a lot of emphasis on kind of creating an environment that the occupant can feel at ease in, whether it's the massaging, the lighting, the scents, which we'll get into, the sounds. A lot of focus on creating like a pleasant, they used a lot of adjectives that I think it was like a sensory overload or something, or like an assault on the senses. But it is apparent that they put a lot of focus on sort of the way that this looks and feels. And I would say that getting in, you know, we've looked at a lot of different vehicles, but this is a vehicle that as you start to get into it, looks and feels like something you'd expect if you're spending $130,000 on a vehicle. So let's hop on in. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start it up here. So now that we're inside, we've started up the vehicle. You can see the headlights had some animation there as they came on board. You can see we've got our light pipes there powering up. You can see we've got this large series of screens all behind the single pane of glass here, and it's asking me about what I want to do as far as a profile. One thing that's kind of interesting, so the vehicle, you know, for years, vehicles have had, you know, driver profiles that'll adjust like where your seat's at, the wheel, the things to your preferences. No exception here. Although it does have some kind of unique things as far as logging into that. You saw there was some options when you pull it up. There is also on the center console here, there's what looks like a little black rectangle. That's actually a biometrics scanner. I don't think I have a profile in here for it yet, so it's not going to pick it up. But you know, you've seen that on laptops, things like that. It's got a little scanner whereby you can make a profile, customize it to your fingerprint, and then with a swipe of that, it'll know who's in the vehicle. So kind of a neat feature there, a little different take on memory seats and settings. As we're powered up here, again, one thing I would just point out, you know, you've got your LEDs, your light pipes going across the full periphery here. You've got them coming down and around, you've got them above, you've got them on the doors, you've got them in the footwells, and even, I think this has been mentioned by others, but even your seat belts have illumination on them around the ring, kind of reminding you politely to plug those in. You've got the light pipes that continue on the seats here. You've got footwell lighting in the rear. You've got lighting in the door pockets. Again, I lost count at slightly over 30 on the LEDs, and I think certainly this is the most interior lighting I've seen in a vehicle. While we're on that topic, maybe I'll just real quickly touch on all that's configurable as far as the lights. So if I go into the settings here, there's an area that shows lighting. Actually, I think I got to go into the comfort. Consider that. Yeah, so ambient lighting. If I go to this menu, you see they've got a bunch of presets for both monochrome and multicolor. If we pop into some of these, pretty vivid and differences here, and just even looking at the attention to detail, like I have never seen an LED tied into interior theme that was embedded into an HVAC vent. And while it might seem like a little thing, just the logistics associated with bringing power and light and embedding a light pipe and a light driver into something that's articulating and having air blow through it, there's definitely a lot of effort that went into the lighting of this vehicle. And you can see too, it's not just a single color. They have these different themes where you've got the color that differs through there. And the interesting thing about that is, you know, the way a light pipe works, you've got like a semi-translucent piece of plastic that's considered your light pipe. And at the end of that, you have a driver. And the complexity of that driver, like, you know, it can emit a single color, but if you're getting some of this multicolor harmony, the complexity and the cost of those drivers are going up. And you can see not only do they have the pipes, but the drivers for the customization all throughout the vehicle. So definitely a ton of focus on the lighting, and kind of neat to see what they did with that here. One thing we'll also get to in a moment is within the ambient lighting, beyond just the color, there's some interesting additional things to be aware of. So they've got some of these settings here: operating feedback, warning support, multicolor animation. Those aren't readily apparent if you do or don't select them here, but basically those, what they do is they tie to the operation of the vehicle. So you'll see if there's certain things we do operating feedback as we're going, like if I increase the temperature, you can see now this light pipe up here, because I'm going in the hot direction, it's giving me a little kind of scrolling swipe there to indicate I'm raising the temperature. Similarly, if I'm lowering it, making it cooler, same thing. It's independent for driver and passenger. So that would be like the operating feedback. Warning, I think we'd have to be out on the road if we got out of our lane or something. I think it can give us some animation. And then multicolors is just if you're wanting to turn that functionality off altogether, you do have that option. Go back to the home screen here. And again, one thing I would point out that is kind of neat. So Mercedes chose to use what they call a zero layer that allows you to keep some of the more common functions anchored at the lower portion of the screen so that they're always accessible. You know, as we get into more of these vehicles where it's the amount of physical touch buttons have started to leave and we're relying more on the screens, you do hear from different users that maybe have a preference or difficulty navigating that it would be nice to know exactly where certain things are at all times. So you can see down here they've got your HVAC always stays anchored if you're in the zero layer. You've got a home button back. You have a couple other things here as well, probably features that people would consider, you know, the critical ones for functionality, your defrosting. Kind of an interesting one here in the middle. So this kind of, you've got like a little green icon showing some waves. If we click on that, it will take us to the air quality section. And so with this vehicle, kind of unique, what it's showing, so PM, so usually ppm is what you see when people are describing air quality, which is parts per million. So they're showing both the exterior and interior air quality. So right now we've got the windows open and we're hopefully this building air quality is decent and it's saying we're in a good range, but it'd be interesting to see if you were to go out and maybe went through a particularly smoggy area, what the exterior versus the interior is. It does show those separately. They do have a HEPA filter in here. They give you a little information on that. High efficiency particulate arrestor. Basically, it's like a hospital grade filter that is picking up really, really small contaminants in the air. Something that they have in here, obviously people are becoming more and more concerned with air quality. Kind of neat that they show that here. They have it at a glance, what your air quality is. They've got the color ranges. Also kind of interesting. Last I checked back here, I think they have a screen. Yeah, so you can even see your air quality readout on the rear HVAC, which kind of interesting. I don't know if my daughter was in the back seat, how interested she'd be in air quality, but good to see that they're giving everyone that insight and option. While we're at this screen, something else kind of interesting to note, and this isn't a new feature for Mercedes-Benz, but you see that you've got a little option for fragrance here. So you can see when I click that, it's lowering and raising a bar, and you might be wondering, okay, what fragrance are we talking about here? This vehicle actually has a canister mounted in the glove box that's tied in line to the HVAC system. So your air inlet is up in that corner. There's a feature called a plenum that air gets drawn through. So basically in line with that, there's like a small canister. I'm going to get out here in a second, but it's got, you know, an opportunity whereby the air that's being drawn in to distribute through the system can pass by this fragrance canister, and you can apply different levels of fragrance to the vehicle. So to see what that looks like, we got the glove box over here. I'm going to pop it open. There's just a little button that drops it, and in the upper left-hand corner here, there's a very aesthetically pleasing little fragrance bottle. And I'm just trying to read here. There's some different colorful descriptions of what's going on. This one's called Linen. Nice fresh scent there. Mercedes-Benz does sell different options for these, so I think you can get, you know, whatever suits your fancy. But these, you know, it's a consumable, it get used up. Probably just a very small amount gets used. So I'm not sure how long or how frequently you'd need to replace it, but you do have the option for different ones. Pretty easy, just slides in place and it's retained. As far as I know, they don't have like an Axe body spray variant or anything like that, so sorry to disappoint anyone, but they do have a full library of different scents to suit people's preferences. All right, so continuing through some of what we're seeing on the screen here, I would point out, so the screens here are not all created alike in terms of what they offer. So these two specifically are what's called OLED screens. OLED stands for organic light emitting diode. And for any like kind of electronic enthusiasts or maybe TV heads that are out there, you might know or be aware that that OLED technology is something that is really sought after in terms of screens and screen quality, specifically for the blacks that it can provide, the darkness, the level of depth. People say that the picture quality is just kind of out of this world. And what that has to do with the way that the LEDs are illuminated. And so with an organic light emitting diode, when that pixel's not turned on, there's no backlight that's supplying the light source. So it is a true black. There's no sort of dead black lighting behind there. So people like it for just the richness of picture that it provides. So on the screens where you're seeing, you know, where people would perceive and be looking at images or videos that would appreciate that depth, it's on both of these. But I think something else worth noting as well is that OLED technology allows you to use less power than a conventional like a LCD with a backlit screen. So the numbers I've seen indicate that in terms of efficiency, an OLED screen, in addition to providing a better picture, more quality, richness of the dark features, also consumes like 30% less energy. So especially when we think about this in the context of an EV, right, and range being king and wanting to maximize the efficiency of the vehicle, Mercedes spent the money, used the OLED screens, got the premium visual appearance, and also benefited from some of the increased efficiencies of those. So kind of neat to see there. As far as I know, this is not an OLED screen here, so this one maybe wasn't perceived as critical. But yeah, again, size-wise, these two are about the same. This one, 17.7 inches. I will note that as far as I'm aware, when it comes to IP screens, at 17.7 inches, this is the largest I've seen in production. Again, in the Model S, Model X, they have a 17-inch diagonal on their screens. I know in the new Cadillac Escalade, they have something actually somewhat similar to what we're seeing in the EQS here. LG was the manufacturer of these screens in here. A separate company made the glass, this curved glass that gets bonded to it. In the new Escalades, LG also made those screens, but it's a slightly different take where they don't extend quite as far to the passenger side. They still have 3 screens, but it kind of cuts off about here, so not quite as wide as this one. I think I like that they are putting more attention on what's going on the passenger side here. This is just kind of a default image that you're able to, you can configure this with different ones. I think you can even put your own image in. It is interesting to note that when you're sitting in the driver's seat, like I am, this is just kind of a dead screen. There's not much, you can't interact with it. If I were to go sit in the passenger seat, which we'll do here in just a moment, it's using the sensors in the seat that are there for safety measures and seatbelt warnings, and it's actually then allowing me to interact with that screen. So kind of interesting from a safety perspective. They're wanting to make sure that I'm not sitting here as a driver streaming videos in an unsafe way without a passenger present. So kind of interesting there. Let's go back to the home screen, look at a few different things that kind of caught our eye here. First, top left here, we'll go to the Mercedes EQ area. One of the things that's kind of neat, you know, a lot of EV OEMs are doing things like this to try and show people their power consumption, different levels, what options they have. One thing that was kind of neat here, there's a function called range, where if you go to this, it shows you some of the different interior functions that you have and how those are impacting what your range could be. So this vehicle is equipped with a lot of nice things. It's got massaging seats and heated seats. It's got a lot of lighting, different things like that. But if you want to maximize your range, it gives you the option to not only see how those things impact this, but if you hit maximize range, you'll notice those LEDs that were up there, as nice as those are, those do draw power, and ultimately that's going to impact range. So when we go to maximum range, you can see it's done things like turn off the LEDs. You can see the screens have gone dim. So it does give you the option to go ahead and try and maximize that range. But you'll see, again, nice feature, this 0-layer screen. You do still have some of your critical functions, we'll call them, visible at the bottom. So even though these aren't hard touch buttons, you still have that look and feel. All right, we're going to get out of the maximized range. Or whoop, no, we turned it back on. Excellent. Okay, so we've got our sweet LEDs back. We're back to our home screen. Just a couple other things I want to touch on here, and then I'll jump over to the passenger screen. Let's see here. So, oh, not on the lighting. And it is rather intuitive. I'd say there's a lot of features in this vehicle, and so for anyone to get in and just like know it right away, even as intuitive as it is, it's going to take some learning. So I apologize for a little bit of the clunkiness there. I am still getting to know the car, but it's interesting to see. You've got a lot of menus. I think it would definitely take anyone some time to kind of digest all of this. Let's see here. So one of the things I wanted to show, a little bit unique, we mentioned the different senses that they're kind of attacking here. So if I'm in the vehicle section and I go under driving, there's one called sound experience here. Now if I go to that, I can turn this on, and I don't know if the video will pick it up, if the microphones will, but if I go to the settings, I have 2 different options, vivid flux and silver waves. And if I click these, we'll go to silver waves. Okay, there's kind of this futuristic like ambiance, vivid flux, maybe a little bit, again, kind of a sci-fi feeling thing. And if you listen carefully in the background, it's almost like you're at a spa. There's just this low ambient noise that's kind of rising and falling. And not only is that ambience just there, but it's actually tied to the driving modes of the vehicle. So as you're going, if I'm accelerating, it makes a noise while I'm accelerating. And in the Silver Waves version, you can even see here, it says, every ride becomes an acoustic experience. Your vehicle welcomes you. The motor sound accompanies your ride in the interior. So if you're having a hard time getting into the EV space and you miss the sound of an internal combustion engine, believe it or not, they actually have a sound mode here that applies, it's mild, it's not going to sound like a Hellcat or anything, but it applies like some motor noise matched with your acceleration so that it feels and sounds more like you're driving a conventional vehicle. So interesting feature. I would say there is a really premium sound system in this vehicle. They've got a lot of different speakers. Some of the audio settings, really neat, like equalizer matrix, and we can touch on that. But, you know, it's interesting to look at some of these things that once you've got the hardware to do this, it doesn't cost you anything else to add some of these audio profiles. So interesting to see the different features that they're providing, spending more time kind of on the software side of making sure that this vehicle is like a pleasing environment for someone to be hanging out in. Another thing just worth mentioning here, this is kind of a funny name, but I understand it. And at first I had to kind of get into it. So you've got this vehicle creep function, which sounds like an odd name for a function, right? But what that essentially is, in a conventional internal combustion vehicle with an automatic transmission, you have a torque converter that when you put it into gear, you have, and you let off the brake, you'll creep forward just a little bit. It's very slow. It's like an idling speed. That's a function of the torque converter in the automatic transmission, grabbing and idling at that speed. It's why you have a park pawl. It's just kind of a nature of the physics of how that component's designed. In an EV, you don't have a torque converter, you don't have a conventional transmission, you don't have an idling engine, but I think they realize that most people are used to that, right? So if you want it to be set up so that when you let off the brake pedal, you creep forward a little bit, which I think most people appreciate just to know that the vehicle's on, Mercedes went so far as to add that. So they're just gonna slightly power the motors and allow you to creep forward. You can turn it off if you want, but if anyone's wondering what the creep function is, that's here and it is configurable. So, and they give that kind of description here. So kind of neat thinking about, I think that is one thing that kind of really jumps out is in this vehicle, I think they're thinking about all customers, right? And people that are making that transition from their super nice S-Class internal combustion, you know, kind of land yacht of a vehicle. As people ease into the EVs, they've taken a lot of care to do things that I think will make sure that people are still comfortable. You know, you got the sound, you can make it sound like an ICE vehicle. You can make it idle from letting the pedal off like it. You've got your anchored buttons. So interesting to see. I feel like this vehicle compared to maybe some of the more Spartan choices we've seen in the Teslas, like more people would jump into this and probably feel at ease than so. It wouldn't be as stark of a contrast, right? So kind of unique there. I'm trying to think. Anything else we haven't touched on? Now this is, I think this has been touched in other videos. They do have a lot of flexibility as far as massage features here. One thing that was kind of interesting to note, some were a little dismayed by this. You can see you've got features for the back and for the shoulders, but for anyone who might have a sore seat, the massage features don't appear to go down into the cushion area. So it is awesome to have this, certainly a luxury, but it is, at this point at least, isolated to the upper shoulders and back. And there's a few different modes here. Configurable for both driver and passenger. You can change the intensity, but yeah, definitely a nice feature. I wish I could adapt this into my vehicle. And then maybe the last thing on seating here that I would point out, this is kind of unique. We've seen it on other Mercedes-Benz vehicles, but kind of a nice feature here. Not that people are cycling drivers all the time, but there's this setting in the seats called automatic seat positioning. And what you do here, you can set your height. They let you pick it in inches or centimeters. But if I were to say I was 6'6", and I say start positioning, if you look here, the seat is going to shift backward, and then the wheel is going to come up and telescope. I'm tilting in multiple axes here. Now, obviously, I'm about 5'10", 5'11" on a good day, so I'm not 6'6". So looking at this, yeah, I feel weird now. It doesn't really fit. My arms are stretched out. I'm sitting pretty low. I can't really see up over the IP very well. So this wouldn't suit me, but obviously I've put in the wrong height. But just out of curiosity, like if I were to change this to 5'10", which is my actual height, I'm going to reposition it, and we'll see how close it comes to winding up at something that seems palatable. So I've come up, I've come forward, I've tilted. The seat just lowered a little bit for the legs. I've got the wheel here. I think, so the visibility is definitely good. I'm probably a little closer to the wheel than I would naturally kind of set up, but I would imagine they've probably set this up based on different profiles for you know, maximum ergonomics and safety, distance to airbags. So I would say at a first blush, it at least got me close. In the ballpark, I'm reasonably comfortable, and it definitely feels like it would be a safe driving position. So something worth noting there. I would just mention on the topic of safety too, I know we've been talking a lot about the screen, the functions, the construction. So something that I think people might not always realize when you're talking about a monument this large on the dash is there's a lot of effort that has to go into thinking about what this might do in different impact scenarios. So you can see we span the full dash. This is pretty tall. You have to be concerned not only about frontal impact, but also rear impact. If you get hit hard enough from behind, you don't want this thing to flip down into your lap and create, if it came dislodged in some sort of a high impact scenario. So it was interesting, did a little digging. We haven't had a chance to actually tear one of these vehicles down yet, so I'm going to have to take Mercedes at their word. But they did publish some information whereby they talked about the considerations that went into how this screen is mounted to the cross-car beam, which is the structural element that spans, beneath the instrument panel. And what they actually had to do was create mini crush absorbers, or crush cans, if you will. So you've got your beam structure. They have it's a combination of aluminum and rubber EPDM that both isolates and provides a crush structure, so that if you were in some sort of scenario where you came forward and you hit this screen, there's actually some mechanical compliance that would allow it to compress into the dash, such that it's not going to be a hard monument that you split your head open on or anything. I also think it's worth mentioning that this vehicle, it has plenty of airbags. I believe it has knee airbags. It certainly has passenger airbags. One of the things they had to do, you can see you've got the logo up here. So the geometry of an airbag can be catered to how you want it to unfurl, what you want it to do. So because they're coming from the top here, when this bag inflates, it's going to go along the glass, but it's also going to drop down and cover this. So it's not as if you're going to be hitting this screen with any sort of normalcy in an impact, but if for any reason someone they did have to have those provisions in there. And that is one thing too that I think, like, as we look at more and more focus on infotainment and people think about, well, why can't you just put a bigger screen? I've got a big computer monitor. I want that puppy right there. In principle, it sounds great, but I think it is worth noting that as safety regulations continue to become more restrictive, which is definitely a good thing, right? We want to be safe. There's a ton of focus that goes on to each and every component in a vehicle that someone could potentially encounter in an impact scenario. So, when someone's designing a screen, obviously there's a lot of focus on the software and the aesthetics, but there's an equal amount of focus that goes into looking at how this is going to perform in the event of a collision and making sure that occupants are safe. And in this case, Mercedes-Benz had to do basically a novel impact absorbing structure between the screen and the beam to make sure that if that comes into contact, it's not going to create an issue. So just remember, safety is a big thing when it comes to the screens. So another thing I just wanted to mention real quick before I shift to the passenger side is on the steering wheel here, there's a couple of different, you've got a lot of options here. You've got some capacitive touch buttons up front. You've got volume here. So with this confused a few people, but to raise and lower the volume, you don't actually need to push it. It's just capacitive touch, so you can scroll up and down, and it actually seems to work a little better if you go slower. Similarly, the rest of these buttons, it just kind of takes like a light press to navigate with those. But also on the steering wheel, you've got some kind of satin chrome looking paddles on the back side here. And for anyone who might not be sure what they are, I can tell you they are not for volume, which a few people thought initially. These are actually a part of the driving profile for regen braking. So depending on how aggressive you want that regen to be, if you want to back it off, you can hit the minus paddle. If you want to increase the regen and make it more of like a one pedal driving experience, you can hit the plus. And so you can configure that system. I think that's kind of nice. We've seen some other people approach it in a similar fashion, but also some people make it configurable where it's just a mode, and whatever screen, you have to dig in the IP infotainment screen to get to that point where you can check the modes. Kind of nice to have it just at your fingertips, at your disposal. These paddles, pretty ergonomically friendly, nice touch to them. You're not going to have to be moving all over the place to get to that. So that is a nice feature. And certainly for those who want to play around with the different regen modes as they're in motion, you can do that in a safe way here. One last thing I forgot to mention, and I guess we should just touch on this. So again, there's a few different buttons here on the console. One of them, it's got like kind of like a camera logo here. Kind of neat to have at quick reference. If I hit that, you'll see up on the screen, we go into like the surround view monitoring mode. I just want to show here, it does look a little funny. Some of the images are distorted because we have some things kind of close to us. So that Kia that's next to us is not 3 times the height of this vehicle, I can assure you that. But pretty neat here. It gives you, surround view monitoring is not a new thing. plenty of vehicles have features similar to this, but they differ in how, like, the quality of the images and how they stitched them together, how many cameras they use. This one is pretty sharp, and it's neat to be able to have like sort of infinite adjustability in how you scroll around and can look at yourself. Obviously, this is going to become really critical when we think about things like parking or, you know, getting into tight spots, maybe parallel parking, and they do have some different presets here that show you like your side view. So if I was trying to get snug to a curb, it's got a preset there. If it's on the blind side, they've got that option. I can look at my front view. I can look at my rear view. Whoops. Let me go back to that mode. And it is, sorry, and I'm just gonna hit this once again. I don't know what's going on right now. Sorry about this.
The car turn off says not ready to drive.
Interesting. Okay, I don't know how we want to pick up this, but I'll go back to the camera screen. And one last thing I wanted to mention here. This one's kind of interesting. I had to kind of think about when would I use this. But there's an option here that's got like sort of a GPS marker with the camera, and if I hit that, it says GPS position save. The camera will be switched on here automatically in the future. So I was trying to think. A little bit interesting. I guess you can have presets for recording. Maybe if there's like a busy intersection or something, you think, man, I always wish I had a camera rolling here. I always see crazy stuff. You can apparently have a GPS tag that starts you recording based on your coordinates. So you have that option if you want. The other thing with the cameras, you know, it's interesting to see sort of what features Mercedes-Benz chose to sort of borrow from some other vehicles and what ones they did that were totally unique. As far as potentially mimicked Tesla features, something that they have in this vehicle is, I think they call it Guard 360 mode, but and I actually don't know how to access the recordings of it, but essentially, you know, Tesla has Sentry mode. Obviously, you can see they have all the cameras, the ability to record. If you have the cameras, it makes sense. Why not? Mercedes has set up what they like a guard mode, whereby for security reasons you can have recordings of what's going on the outside of your vehicle. It's funny, this kind of makes it look like a little like Matchbox car with the other bigger one next to it, but cool that they use that feature. The one other sort of glaring Tesla-esque thing that I see in the front of this vehicle, not on the infotainment screen per se, but if you look up here, you'll notice there is no grab handle along this pillar. There's none on the passenger side, none on the driver's side, and also none in the rear seats, if we pan and just get some of that. And it might seem like a small thing, but I would just point out that, so no Tesla vehicles have any grab handles. And for a long time, people were like, oh, well, you know, that's Tesla, that's kind of weird, whatever, if they want to do that. We're not necessarily going to do that. However, it is interesting to note that in a $130,000 Mercedes-Benz, sort of their renewed flagship EV, also if you look in the BMW iX, for whatever reason with EVs, there seems to be more comfort with getting rid of some of those like legacy features that people may or may not even use, but were just in the vehicles. So no grab handles here. And the only reason I point that out, I have this discussion with customers sometimes, it might seem like a small thing, but for 4 grab handles, you know, you've got the handle itself. You may potentially wrap the handle with leather, which they probably would in this vehicle. Behind that, you have brackets that would go to the body in white. You would have to worry about, for your curtain airbags deploying around that, you might need to have a separate shield. So there's cost in that. And just for reference, I guess making that decision to take the grab handles out of the vehicle, probably between at least $20 to $40 in this vehicle when you factor in the handle, the coverings, the body in white provisions, all 4 locations, the fasteners, depending on how opulent they go with the covering, could be on the high side of that. But we're talking about tens of dollars here to take that out. And frankly, I can't remember the last time I used a grab handle. So as far as I'm concerned, especially on vehicles that are going to live on the pavement, right? You might want it if you're off-road, you're bouncing around, but I don't think anyone's going to be doing off-roading in this. So I'm a fan. I'm on board. Save a little money. Get rid of the grab handles. I don't think anyone uses them anyways. So kind of interesting there. I'm going to run around to the passenger side real quick. We can take a look at that screen and then we'll wrap up. I think it might get mad at me here because I'm leaving the vehicle with it running. All right, so as we get into the vehicle here, one thing I want to point out on this screen before I sit down, there's no icon or anything here for me to press. But when I get in the seat, and the weight is detected. Suddenly I get a power button. So if I hit that, now I have essentially like a mirrored version of what we saw initially on the main infotainment screen. I'm going to go ahead and proceed without a profile here. It's going to start up, and what you'll notice is I have pretty much the majority of the MBUX infotainment system. And MBUX, it's the name that Mercedes gives to this sort of generation of infotainment systems. But all that content is over here on the passenger side and can be operated independently. So if I cycle through, you'll see kind of all the same icons. I can still go in, change my massage settings, mess with the seating, mess with the lighting. And one thing, so, there's a selfish reason maybe to have a screen for a passenger, right? You can go to apps, you can stream. Specifically, like, we understand that the reason that they don't have this on for the driver, if you don't have a passenger, is they don't want you watching a movie here. But assuming you do have a passenger, they can put on headphones, they can watch something separate on this screen. That is a nice function to have. Certainly, I think we'll continue to see more of this, like more focus. We've had it in the back seats for kids and things like that, but to see the passenger seat become an area where infotainment now extends to encompass, I think this is a great example of someone taking a plunge into actually focusing on what's going on for the passenger here. But the other thing that I would say in the unselfish sense of being a passenger is, someone says, okay, shotgun, co-pilot, you're up there. This does allow you to tie into the navigation system. So one of the things that's kind of neat is if you're saying you're driving with a friend, a spouse, whatever, and you need to put in some directions, you can, without changing what's on the driver's screen there, you can come in here. I can punch in a destination. Say we want to go to whatever, McDonald's. It'll probably give me a bunch of options here. We'll see. Little latency, it's loading. I don't know. Oh, here we go. We've got no shortage of McDonald's to go to. But interestingly, I just think it's neat that as a passenger, as a co-pilot, you can be a true co-pilot, punch the things in here, not have to compromise what's going on the other screen. And if I punch this in, again, it's going to give me some choices here. But then if we pan back to the main screen, we can see like already it's showing me, okay, some of the options here for where to go. So I think it is neat that the screen is separate when you want it to be for doing functions that you don't want the driver to do, but it also does make you a more active participant in the driving experience in the sense that you can do serious things like, say, figuring out where you're going. So most of this, again, is the same. It's kind of a mirrored version. I think a couple of the things are restricted, which makes sense. I don't think you'd want to be changing driving modes as a passenger, but for the most part, everything that you can and should be able to utilize is here. And I would say one of the things that's kind of neat as we think about this, stepping back a little bit, and again, we talked about the sense, we talked about the lights, we talked about the sound modes, we've got the massaging. I would just say at a high level, there's a lot of focus that went into this vehicle, not just in using nice materials, which it has, using nice features, which it has, but also thinking about how all those come together in creating kind of this vehicle of the future where it's somewhere you like to hang out in. I think as we continue to move towards higher and higher levels of automated driving or driving assistance, that just becomes more and more critical, right? And so I think, I don't know, of the vehicles I've sat in, if I can sit back and have the ambiance and the lighting and the massaging, this is definitely a vehicle that when you see a $135,000 price tag, maybe you swallow hard, but you get in here and this feels like you're getting that sort of level of content. So it's what you expect in an S-Class Mercedes-Benz. I think it's an interesting juxtaposition against a vehicle like the Model S Plaid, which has a similar price tag, certainly a more Spartan interior, maybe a little bit more in terms of the performance side and pure speed and acceleration and handling. But, there's a reason that people think of Mercedes-Benz when they think of a luxury vehicle. And this, I think they did a phenomenal job with this. There's a lot of content here. And for the money, if you had to pony up that kind of money for an EV and you're making that transition, I think the bang for your buck is here. And I also think it's set up in a way that allows a reasonable transition from a conventional ICE driver to an EV. So really interesting vehicle. Glad to have a chance to hop in and check it out. And I don't know how much longer we're going to have this here for, but hoping to take a few laps around the block in it as well to test out the more dynamic aspects. But anyways, thanks again for your time. Hopefully pointed out some interesting things here. If you have a chance to get in one, definitely do. And yeah, thanks for making time and watching the channel. Always interesting to share. And feel free to like, subscribe, whatever you want to do. Again, we just appreciate it. Thanks so much. Have a great day.